this operation, Heather. That's bored. Relight the asset.
Sir, I need more time.
We have no time. Are you going to give that order or not?
Sir, please.
You're too naive to see the truth. There's no bringing in Bourne.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is September 27th, 2016, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning into Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Into the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote self-ownership and the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent, by threat of force and violence. And we, of course, are happy to hear from you. And you can reach us via phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or via Skype at Nonpartisan Liberty for All. It's all one word. Just send a user request and your name and what you want to talk about. And if you'd like to call in, it's better to send a text first with your name and what you want to talk about as well. And you can get that information if you forget the phone number or the Skype username at Nonpartisan Liberty for All, which also links to all our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and has a number of original articles. I actually just posted 2 over the weekend, articles / blogs and things like that for you to read. And actually, they're kind of piling up, I've noticed. Since I've had the site, which has been a year and a half, I'm starting to write more and more articles. One of them, I believe, was very important. I don't know that it was the best or the best well-written, I don't know if that's proper English, or the most well-written article, but it had a lot of important points in it. And I thought that its importance of points that are the point that I wanted to get across gets across. I mean, I wrote it late at night. It still took me a couple hours going through it and everything, but I wrote it late at night when I was tired, so it's probably not as good as it could be, but I still thought that it was adequate enough to post and that it gets the point across. So check that out if you have time at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. So but right before the show, I saw just an article that I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to cover this next week. Now, there's so many things that I feel I need to talk about, and I have show ideas. I even have shows already, the event set up for the next 3 shows, and now I'll have the next 4 after this. And there's just so many things that are going on that I feel like sometimes, and it's not being smarter than people or anything like that. There are plenty of people that can do all of these things, like engineers and hackers and non-hackers, computer programmers, that I can't do. Although I can write a little SQL, but that's nothing compared to what, these sophisticated programmers do. And it's not about that. It's just about seeing things that other people don't see because they're just in a certain paradigm, or they don't have the time to see it, or they're not looking for it, or they just don't give a fuck, or for whatever reason. So I see these things going on, and it's like almost seeing them in slow motion, and the exploitation of what's going on and the setup of what's going on and how and we'll talk about this the next two shows, all of the things they're doing to prepare for a takeover. And there's another one that I just came across today, and I'll maybe mention it a little in the next 2 days, and then next week I'm going to do a show on the UN, because there's some things that they're doing, and they're just I don't know how I'd even describe them, but it's just a bunch of bullshit. They're a way to begin world government, and that's what they really want to do, as well as take the resources of the U.S. and, even in their own plans, that's what's in there. It's the rich country. I've talked about this, but now they did a commercial for it as well. But their plan about sustainable development, and they did a commercial with all these celebrities, which pisses me off even more. Now they're also talking about they believe there should be reparations to black people for slavery, and also for other stuff that's going on now. And some of the other stuff that's going on now, although is happening, but it's being exploited for one, and they're not telling the whole story. Nobody's telling you in government media that 4 to 5 people a day are killed by police. Nobody's telling you that all races are killed by police, that unarmed white people are killed too, unarmed Hispanic people. It's just getting crazy, because the whole thing, and I could care less about somebody's race, as far as I don't feel any closer to a white person than I do to a Hispanic person or a black person, unless, they're a friend of mine, and probably the person I feel closest to is my fiance, who's Mexican. So, I don't have a agenda or I'm not somebody who feels closeness or some kind of obligation to people that happen to just have the fucking similar skin color or some shit. It's just ridiculous to me. And so nothing I say is based on that. And I've talked about how I witnessed racism, a lot of my life, from both sides. I've seen white people be very racist, and I've seen black people, or whatever you want to call it, discrimination or whatever. And I know some people say, well, black people can't be racist because it's an institutionalized thing. And I don't buy that, but I've seen all of it. So I really don't either way feel any type of closeness with somebody because of their race. It's, it doesn't really make a difference to me. And I've probably had a lot more black friends, at least over, as I got older, than, white people was when I was younger, because that's all there in like elementary school. That's like all there was. But anyway, it's the brainwashing and exploitation of what's going on to push an agenda. And I talked about this when I talked about Black Lives Matter. And if you look on there, the websites they're promoting, they're all communist websites. So it's not even about the police anymore. So when I look at these things, and now the UN getting involved and putting all these things together, you see that it's not about black people. It's about an agenda to take more control and make people, everybody, slaves of the government, which you pretty much already are, because if you're paying a certain, actually any of your money to the government and they're taking it without your permission, that's, you're working for the government. You're paying property tax. They own your property. So we're all slaves to a certain extent, except the, 1%, the very elite, probably less than that, the 10% that actually contribute to running the country. So what's frustrating is that people don't see it. They'll look at it and just say, well, you don't understand it, you're a racist or something along those lines, or you don't understand it because you haven't been through it. And in a way, I can't say that I've had the same experience, because obviously I've had experiences where I experienced racism from white people, and I've talked about it because all my friends were black, and you want to be black and all of that shit. So I experienced that, but I can't say I fully experienced it, is my point. But I can totally relate and understand. And I have things even now that happen. So I can totally experience and relate, but at the same time, I see what is going on, and I see how they're really aiming it at a lot of millennials, because they've been through a whole thing of brainwashing. And I'm at the very at the very end of Generation X. I just missed the beginning of the millennial generation, but the younger millennials are the ones that are, or the ones that are in their early 20s, are especially being, brainwashed, because you can't tell me that it's worse now for people of color than it was when I was in high school. It's not. Now, that doesn't mean that racism has been eliminated, because it hasn't, and the biggest place it comes from, or the biggest perpetrator of racism, is the injustice system, is what I call it, the court system and the police. And that's the biggest. And, they're the ones with the power. But then they're turning to government, and they might not even realize, groups like Black Lives Matter, some of the people might not even realize you can't sit there and ask for, protest the police and then ask for more government. It just doesn't. More government is going to bring more force and more violence and more police. And people think that because it's not a criminal law, it doesn't mean it's not enforced by the quote-unquote authorities or law enforcement. Taxes is not a criminal law. It becomes criminal, or any law. Health, not fucking getting health care. All of these things, the more laws, the more power you're giving to the government. So it's a big contradiction. And people aren't looking at it for what it really is. They're being fucking, I don't want to say bamboozled because of that movie, but they are for a political agenda. They're being used and screwed over. And it's frustrating to me, especially, how the government has treated black people over the years. And that's what they're doing. And they're telling them that you can't do things for yourself. You need us, you whatever. And people don't even realize that there's the percentage of black people, there's obviously millions, and that are, the stereotypical that government media presents is not the majority of black people. And it's like people believe that. And it's just, I don't know. I don't want to get into a whole thing on this because we'll talk more about at least the UN. And I've been talking about this a lot anyway, but we'll get into it when we get into the UN probably next week, along with what they're trying to do, which of course they present it in a way, oh, it sounds great, but it's not. It's the same type of thing. It's a take total control, have all these international laws, because if you have international laws, if you have laws over 8 billion people, you have if you think you have power now, which you don't, how are you going to have power when there's 8 million people? There's going to be a bunch of bureaucrats at the top that control everything. And that's how it is now in the U.S. anyway. But it's going to be even worse. So we'll get to that in the next couple of days and next week. I don't want to spend all my time on that when there's important stuff to talk about tonight that is going on as well. A bunch of articles about a cashless society and more push to move to a cashless society, and the ramifications of that are very bad. You could say there's positives to it. Of course, there's always positives, and that's how they try to hook people from the positives. Unfortunately, there's a percentage of people that when things are introduced, new technology usually, or new things, they think that it's not going to be corrupted or it's not going to be exploited. And they say, oh, we're not going to do that. The things that people worry about, they come out and say, oh, we're not going to do that. Like guns. Oh, no, we're not going to confiscate guns. And they do. And you can look throughout history of all the things that government has said, no, but we'll never do that. A social security card, it will never be used as identification. There's so many things that they've done throughout history that they have said that, oh, we're never going to use this for this. And of course, they end up doing it. They take pictures of you. They have the license plate readers now. I mean, they didn't come out and say, well, we're never going to have license plate readers, but license plates were meant for a certain purpose. Licenses were meant for a certain purpose. Now it's you need a license by 2020. You need the Real ID, which puts all your information in a national database. The databases are getting overwhelming, but what's going to happen is all these databases are going to link based on your social security number, and they're going to have a huge profile on everybody, and they're going to have technology that it goes through these profiles and finds the data that they need. And another database that they're going to have pretty soon is the two things that I'm going to talk about tonight. One they already have is the DNA database, and we'll talk a little about that and how they're expanding that. And then we'll talk about moving to a cashless society and the ramifications of that and how they're just terrible in what can be done moving to a cashless society and how many freedoms that actually takes away. But people think that, well, if we move to a cashless society, you know, of course, government is going to promise that, well, we would never do this or that or all of these things that you worry about. And of course they would. And it's the first thing they do. And it's their whole motivation to do it in the first place. They don't do things. I was listening to a Larkin Rose video today, which it's funny because Larkin Rose is somebody that I didn't get my ideas from him, but he expresses them so much better. So I'll hear him talk about these ideas, and I totally agree with all his ideas. I didn't learn them from him. I'm sure there's some things here and there, but it's great to listen to how he is able to explain them and how he's able to articulate these ideas. And I suggest people go to his YouTube channel and watch some of his videos. And he has some, most of them are short. I mean, you know, between 10 to 15 minutes. And then he has other stuff out there where he has done speeches for an hour and stuff like that. And he really is somebody who I think can convince people that the government is doing what they're doing and really just convince them of the truth. And that's what I do as well. I mean, I have opinions based on facts, and I come to conclusions based on facts and based on history. But really, you know, like in the Matrix, it's like all I'm offering is the truth, and that's really what it is. And tomorrow we'll get into all the things that the government is doing, and I'm sure I'll miss a whole bunch of them because they're doing so much. It's like an attack on all fronts. But people tend to just trust. I think more and more people are not trusting the government, but they tend to think that, well, the government's doing it for this reason, the reason they give you, which is never the reason why. So I want to go into DNA databases first. They already exist. There was a court case where they can take your DNA, I believe, if you're arrested for a felony. And that would mean that if you are not convicted of that felony, they have your DNA in a database and they don't have to give it back. Or I don't know if you want it back, but I mean, they don't have to delete it out of the database. It's there. And there was a story that I read in this article. I have to go back to it as a reference, but I got to figure out where I put it. I have so much stuff up. So there were 5 teenage boys that were sitting in a car in a gated community, and police officer pulls up. First of all, not enough kids know their rights. And a place like, of course, government school, they don't teach you about your rights when you encounter the police. You would think, I took a law class. That's how fucked up the schools are. So I took a law class in school, and it wasn't even for college credit, I guess. I still don't get how that works, because it's not like you get credits in college. Maybe when they look at your transcripts, they don't count it. Like if you get an A, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't count towards your GPA, maybe, because they had, you know, courses that had a C or an S, like college or standard, and maybe that's what it meant. I'm thinking it did. I mean, this is, of course, years and years ago. So, but we took a law class. Of course, how to interact with police never came up that I can recall. And if it did, it never came up what your rights are. And you would think that that's something that's important, that you have the right to remain silent, that you have the right to, have an attorney present during questioning and all of this stuff. I know they read you your rights, but that's when they arrest you. But you don't have to answer any questions even prior to that. And I don't remember learning any of that in any history classes neither, although we did go through the Bill of Rights. We had history, I believe, in 5th grade and 11th grade. And that was it. And I remember memorizing the preamble, but you don't memorize the 10 amendments that I can recall, because the 9th Amendment, I was never aware of the 9th Amendment, which is partially my own fault, but I was never aware of it until a few years ago. I knew there was a 9th Amendment, but what it actually said, and, I might have went through it when I was a kid and just, whatever, when you're 5th grade, I was 10 years old. So they don't want you to know what your rights are, of course, which is something that to me should be taught to kids in school if they were actually teaching kids things they need to know to get through life. Just like they don't teach you, how to balance your checkbook or whatever. Actually, I don't know that that's totally true, because I think in one of my math classes they sort of did, but it wasn't enough. So, and now no one writes checks anyway, but I took accounting classes and I actually worked in accounting for a while, so I obviously know all that shit now. But schools don't teach a lot that people that are going to help people in life, never mind what how to question things and ways of thinking. But anyway, so the 5 teenage boys were parked in a car in a gated community in Florida. Officer pulls up behind them. He closed one of the rear doors, which had been open, and told them to stay in the car. And he peered into the driver's side window. He asked what the teens were doing. This is in March 2015. And they told him they're visiting a friend for a sleepover. So, not that they even have to answer any of this shit, but they don't probably know that. He told them there had been a string of car break-ins in the area. Whether there was or not, who knows? They make up shit. But after questioning some more, he asked which one of them wanted to give a DNA sample. So one of them agreed to do it, which it's, you could say, based on the law, because they asked. This is how they get around it, even though the law doesn't matter. I don't know if people have realized that yet. Obviously, how many laws have broken the Constitution? Probably hundreds of thousands. Anyway, one of them volunteered. So they did the cotton swab in the cheek, and he signed a consent form and, put his thumbprint on it to show that he agreed to it. So he told the story later, meaning he thought that he had to give his DNA. He didn't realize when an officer says, he didn't say you have to, like, they word things like that, like which one of you. Just like when they stop you at a DUI checkpoint, they ask how much you had to drink. They don't ask, have you had anything to drink? So over the last decade, they've been collecting DNA from people any way they can to get it into this DNA database. And large cities mostly have the public labs, and they feed the DNA samples into the FBI's national database. So what they're trying to do, so this was in Melbourne, and in Melbourne, that's what they do in Melbourne. I was thinking it meant Australia for a minute, but then I forgot there's Melbourne, Florida, and I had said Melbourne, Florida at the beginning. But so any opportunity that they get, and who knows, maybe they get some kind of bonus or something, or I don't know, for getting DNA in there. But in Florida law, it says basically they can ask for consent, and if they get it, they get it. But to ask anybody under, this is where you can't have it both ways. So if you want to say that if you're under 18, you can't give consent, right? Then how the fuck can you give consent to take your DNA? Because most parents would say no. And of course, the cop is not going to even probably bother if he has to go to the parent and deal with all that shit. But he knows asking a kid that kids are scared, they don't know their rights, and that they'll probably just, give them the DNA. And that's what happened in this example here. So you have and that's just one example, but you have in these cities that they're building up DNA databases at DUI checkpoints. If you're acting suspiciously, they might ask you for your DNA. Now, again, you don't have to give it. I believe, though, as I mentioned earlier, that the Supreme Court had ruled that if you are convicted of a felony, because there was a case where they had taken the DNA, not convicted, I'm sorry, arrested for a felony, because there was a case, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that someone was arrested for a felony but not convicted, and they took their DNA and they wouldn't take it out of the database. So any chance they get, they're collecting DNA. And here it says, according to a document obtained through a public information request, the Melbourne Police Department collected 307 cheek swabs in 2015, most of which were elimination samples. 15 were taken from suspects in connection with the particular crime. 9 more were taken when suspects were arrested, and 38 were taken during field interviews unconnected to any particular crime. So they're building up this database, and this is not, of course, just in Melbourne, Florida. This is all around the country. And what does that do? Now, obviously, you have another database that is storing DNA that probably links to everything else. And that way they can, we can solve crimes this way, but, they can, it's just like fingerprints, where if your fingerprints in a database, now they want your DNA in a database. And their goal is really to have everybody's DNA in a database. And maybe at some point they'll even pass a law that you have to submit your DNA, or that if you're arrested for anything, that they can take your DNA. So once it's in there, it's in there. And the other thing is they can use it to frame you as well. So I know that, well, if you don't have anything to hide, but they can use shit like that to frame people. So it's not just about collecting people's DNA. It's also about having more information. There's so many, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, and I'm going to do a 2-day special on this, on all of the things that the government is doing to really prepare for pretty much a takeover, because we're already at a point where the government is an oligarchy. which means it's run by the elite. The elite run the government, whoever you want to consider the elite. Also meaning that for the most part, and, fine, there's here and there, but for the most part, and I definitely would put it in 95%, and I mean the stuff that does happen is either by accident or coincidence or just, because it's meaningless, or to show it as an example of the illusion of freedom, because people are very fucking they take things totally not out of context, but they don't look at the big picture. So they look at something like they hear, 20 people were murdered or something, or they see a news story where something happens that's serious. And they don't realize that, even if every day somebody got, and people do, more than one person a day is murdered. But even if every day, 5 people OD'd, and I don't even think it's that high, but they try to claim it is, but I think a lot of it is suicide and mixing of drugs and stuff like that, but OD'd off of like heroin, that it's an epidemic. When you keep forgetting the thing that they're not telling you, or they're not mentioning, and that most people aren't thinking of, is the United States is fucking huge. Now, if you're looking at one geographical area, even in Chicago, they talk about if there's 1,000 murders a year. I mean, the population it depends. If you're talking about Chicago, the metropolitan area, it's something, like 6 million people or something or more. I mean, Chicago is huge. Now, if it's all in one general area, which I believe that's the problem in Chicago, is it's like the South Side or something, or probably an area with a population of a couple 100,000 and 1,000 people die. That's pretty high for the amount of population. And I'm not saying, I have to bring this up all the time because people still don't get it, but I'm not saying that it's good when anybody dies or anything like that, or it's meaningless. But what they do is, this is one of the if they had a textbook on, and they do, I know there's rules for radicals and stuff like that, but if they had a textbook on how to, on propaganda and things like that, or how to, get people to believe or adopt your ideas or convince people of things or whatever, one of them would be to totally distort the facts and take things out of context. So if you're not telling the whole story, if you're saying, oh my God, 1 million people died this year. Yeah, well, there's 320 million people in the country. And actually, the stat I looked at, and it was from one recent year, was like 2.5 million, and 1 million of those were heart attacks and cancer. So when you talk about guns and in school shootings, if there's a school shooting every day and one person gets killed, that's nothing. And compared to the amount of people that are that die or that are causes of death. Because after that million, you still have 1.5 million. And if 365 died in school shootings out of 1.5 million, or really, if you want to count the whole total, 2.5 million, that's nothing. Not that I'm saying that it's okay that people die in school shootings, but what they do is they show all this bad shit they show what they want to show. And I've said this a million times, that it's not about just about how you present a story. It's also about what you choose to show and what you don't show, which is the whole reason that I don't pay attention to government media, although I should pay attention to the local media, because there's some things they can't ignore, and then at least I know what's going on here. I used to check the Review Journal every day, but I don't anymore. But besides that, it's like politics and the debate. It's just a fucking joke. They don't mean anything that they say. And I posted this today because I was thinking about it, that they said that the majority of people don't like the two candidates. So think about that for a second, because it shows even more how things are so fucked up and how the government controls everything. Because if you have the two candidates for president being people that the majority of the country doesn't like or doesn't want, what does that tell you? Obviously, everything is fucking rigged. And it is. The government runs everything. You have no say, and this is what I was getting to. You have no say in your government. And that's why I was saying, well, I kind of got ahead of myself, and, occasionally something will happen. But in general, you have no say in your government. It's an oligarchy. It's run by the elite. So if you want something to happen, if you want to change something, it's not through government. You cannot change anything through the system. But they don't want people to know that, and they don't want people to think that, because then it becomes a danger to them. Not that you change things through violence, but it becomes not a danger, but a hassle. Then you have, if you had millions of people that believe that, you'd have millions of people in the streets. And what are they going to do? The police going to arrest millions of people? No. Or if millions of people stopped obeying. And that's what I believe people should do. That they should stop complying with the bullshit laws and follow natural law, which means you don't hurt anybody and you don't hurt their property. And, it's funny. I can't stand him, but sometimes he does. Or maybe it wasn't Mark Dice that did it, but it might have been. But I'm thinking it wasn't, just because he wouldn't ask these type of questions. Or maybe it was Josie Wales that went around and asked. Yeah, I think it was in a video that went and asked people, if there were no police, would you, commit crimes? And of course, everybody was like, no. Because the truth is that they show you all these evil and bad people. And there are millions of evil and bad people, because millions of evil and bad people don't even make up 1% of the fucking population. So if you have 2 million evil people and then you have 300 million good people, what do you think's going to happen? Are they really a threat, those 2 million people? So it's frustrating because people don't see all this shit. They look at the good side of government. I understand why. I understand how all these things happen and how it gets to the point it does and all of that, because of the brainwashing, because of just even people's want to be happy and have their family and have this American. Why do you think that this American dream was created with the white picket fence and the 2.5 kids? I don't know why they say 2.5 kids. How about 2 3/4 kid? you know, that whole thing was, to me, the way you live or what's acceptable in society it's all a creation of government. It's all a fucking illusion. Not to say that people aren't happy getting married and having kids, because obviously it's in your human nature to reproduce. I mean, that has nothing to do with government. People are genetically born with the disposition to reproduce. I mean, that's something that is just a natural instinct. But this whole thing of, you know, this American dream type thing is a government creation, because once you're in it, you know, obviously you don't want to do anything to fuck it up. You don't want to stand up to the government. You don't want to say, fuck you, I'm not paying taxes because you're robbing me. So I'm going to take a break before we get to the stuff on the Cashless Society. But be careful when it comes to DNA. Don't ever voluntarily give your DNA. I think everybody who listens at least knows that. And if you ever get arrested and they try to take your DNA, do whatever you can to refuse that. Now, obviously, if they just say, we're going to hold you down and take it, we're not asking, that's another story. But police try to distort what they're, quote unquote, commanding you to do and what they're asking. And they do it all the time. And that's why people will ask, am I being detained? Because a police officer can walk up to you and just start talking. And he can make you think that you have to stay there. Now, if you haven't committed a crime or you're not being, you haven't been suspected of committing a crime, you can walk away. And that's why you ask, am I being detained? No, then you walk away. But they can walk up to you and in a way, I mean, I guess they should be able to, because they're people. So if they want to walk up to somebody and start talking to them, I mean, that's really their choice. But they make you think that you have to stay there. And a lot of times you don't. They're just trying to get information. So be sure to check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Again, if you want to call in, the number is 702-336. No, that's not the number. That's my number. The number is 702-740-7664. That's 702-740-7664. And the Skype username is Nonpartisan Liberty for All. And we will be right back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com.
Remember stop and frisk? The unconstitutional practice of cops stopping and frisking someone.
Okay, I got to say one thing real quick, being that they just talked about stop and frisk. Fucking, you know, all these people are talking about how Donald Trump is the savior and all of this shit. Now, first of all, I believe elections are rigged, and whoever wins, it's because they made a deal with the elite, and that's who they wanted to win and whatever. Even if Trump wins, you know. But they're pretty much both the same. And Donald Trump is just as much an authoritarian as Hillary Clinton is. And he's pretty open about it. He wants to bring back stop and frisk. First, he said in Chicago, but then he kind of said, you know, everywhere, and that it is constitutional and whatever. And he said so many things that are anti-freedom, yet people like Alex Jones and a bunch of people that claim to be libertarians support him, and I just don't fucking get it. I don't. Not that I'm a supporter of Hillary, but again, I don't pay attention because it doesn't matter. You know, I did a show on it just because Trump is like a joke to me. and I would listen to the town halls while I was at work, because as I always talk about, I do work that's kind of independent, so I listen to something while I'm working. So those were long things I could listen to on YouTube. So when they had the debates or town halls or whatever, I would listen to those. And I mean, he's a straight up authoritarian. So they narrowed it down to two people that are going to take more control over your lives. They're going to take, and this is by design, they're going to take the baton from Obama, just like Obama took the baton from Bush, and things are just going to continue on the way they've been going, and more authoritarian and less freedom. And Trump has been even vocal about it. I mean, we already know Hillary's going to do the same shit that she's been doing, so she doesn't have to really say much regarding things like that. But we know that all this stuff is going to continue to go on with spying, and he wants, more police and all of that. So just wanted to mention that real quick for all these fucking people that supposedly support freedom and liberty that are Trump supporters. Is ridiculous. So I'll go back to the clip.
Remember stop and frisk? The unconstitutional practice of cops stopping and frisking someone only because they look suspicious? Now cops have upped the ante. Police across the country are stopping people who have not committed a crime and having them give up some of their spit for DNA collection. It's even scarier than stop and frisk, because now cops are doing it to people they don't even suspect of sketchy activity. Now they're just doing it to random people to compile DNA samples, just to build DNA databases of everyone so that their tracking will be that much more complete. During nonviolent encounters with police, like when you get caught riding a bike without a helmet or going through a red light, people are being asked to turn over their DNA by letting the cops swab the inside of their mouth. Now, cops are supposed to ask for it. It's supposed to be voluntary. But more often than not, cops make it seem like it's mandatory, just the way they ask. So people just do it, especially teens who are already scared of getting in trouble. Their parents are nowhere to be found. They don't realize they have a choice. They don't even realize what it is. And they certainly don't even realize it's raising a big constitutional question. Under the Fourth Amendment, cops must have reasonable suspicion a person is doing something criminal before requiring a search or seizure. But since
Alpha Team report. Alpha Team report.
Remember stop and frisk doing it to random people to compile DNA samples, just to build DNA databases of everyone so that their tracking will be that much more complete. During nonviolent encounters with police, like when you get caught riding a bike without a helmet or going through a red light, people are being asked to turn over their DNA by letting the cops swab the inside of their mouth. Now, cops are supposed to ask for it. It's supposed to be voluntary. But more often than not, cops make it seem like it's mandatory, just the way they ask. So people just do it, especially teens who are already scared of getting in trouble. Their parents are nowhere to be found. They don't realize they have a choice. They don't even realize what it is. And they certainly don't even realize it's raising a big constitutional question. Under the Fourth Amendment, cops must have reasonable suspicion a person is doing something criminal before requiring a search or seizure. But since cops are asking people to give up their DNA voluntarily, they're getting around those pesky constitutional rights. And it's becoming so popular that business is booming for DNA collection companies. Now, cops can analyze a person's DNA right at the station in just 90 minutes at automated rapid DNA machines. Cops across the country agree DNA collection is the wave of the future. Bigger cities enter the DNA samples into the FBI's national database, where they're regulated. But smaller cities are partnering with private labs that offer faster, cheaper testing for a local database of citizens where there is zero oversight. It's the ultimate form of tracking, and it's becoming more and more popular. It is surveillance at a level that would blow even Orwell's mind. Makes you kind of long for the days when a cop would just pat you down for no reason and then let you go. With stop and spit, the cops will be watching you forever. Tonight, let's talk about that.
This episode is brought to you by AJ+. Recently, President Obama announced a new program to create a pool of DNA samples from 1 million volunteers. This would be just one of many government-run DNA databases around the world, ones proposed for a variety of well-meaning reasons, like healthcare and preventing crimes. But many people are worried that this precision medicine is the ultimate example of Big Brother and another step in ending privacy for good. So, are DNA databases worth it? The first DNA database was started in the UK in 1995. Soon, other countries followed suit. A 2008 Interpol study of 149 countries found that 54 nations had a national DNA database and 26 others planned to start one. For the most part, these databases started as a way to track and catch criminals. And it's worked. Using its own DNA database, the US's FBI has helped solve innumerable crimes. These cases have even exonerated innocent people who are facing execution. And Chinese police have also set up a DNA database that has connected over 2,000 kidnapped children with their parents. But the effectiveness of using DNA is not what people are concerned about. It's how large these databases are growing. Originally, DNA was only collected from people who were convicted of crimes. However, now in countries like the United States, DNA samples are taken from people even if they are simply suspected of or questioned about a crime. This has grown the FBI database into the largest in the world, with more than 3.5% of the country's DNA on file. If Obama's new DNA program is deemed a success, then it's not unthinkable that one day most of the population's DNA will be filed by the government. Advocates of the scheme suggest that the general population shouldn't be fearful of the new proposal, as the database would only be utilized to support healthcare initiatives and catch criminals. But while this could mean crimes are easier to solve, experts worry that the mismanagement of such a system could leave the database open to hackers. And other skeptics are concerned that supporting the new program is one step closer to mandatory DNA samples for every man, woman, and child in the country. What do you think about DNA databases? Should all countries adopt them? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to get all the latest test tube.
The end of cash is near. We've covered this before here at PFT, and in a nutshell, it's basically a problem reaction solution analysis. They nationalized the monetary system, which is a huge problem. We reacted by demanding more statism, which perpetuated the problem and now has created the proposed solution, which is a cashless society. But how are they going to justify banning cash? I mean, perhaps the next crash in the business cycle is going to be blamed on hoarding stockpiles of cash. We know the big banks and corporations are sitting on cash reserves, and the social justice, environmentalist, eugenics, leftist crowd are likely going to welcome a confiscation of this wealth. In fact, the move to a cashless society is really just one large step towards actual communism. Now, the central banks should not be setting interest rates at ridiculously low levels. It discourages savings and it encourages debt creation. And as we can see in Canada, or the US, or Japan, or Europe, this method of economic growth is really just asset inflation, which leads to recessions and ultimately depression. So their solution is lower interest rates until they're at zero. And then it's negative interest rates. We basically already have that here in Canada. I mean, just ask yourself if your bank or your credit union charges you more each month than you receive in interest. Now, historically, when governments mess around with the economy like this, people respond by hoarding their money. Now, if that money is paper, governments then respond by creating massive inflation and thereby forcing people to spend their money before it becomes completely worthless. Now, it doesn't necessarily quite work like that in our system today, so central banks are now responding by literally eliminating cash. The government wants all cash in the banks, so every transaction can be monitored, regulated, and completely controlled. Imagine the entire world recorded in one giant online ledger, controlled and monitored by a hierarchy of technocrats and self-serving bankers. Eliminating cash may happen after one of the next financial crises. I mean, bailouts have proven to be unpopular, so now there's even talks of bail-ins. We've covered this here before on PFT with Cyprus and the Canadian connection. You see, a bail-in means that when a bank fails, it will reach into its depositors' accounts before accepting any money from taxpayers. And to keep fiat money in the banking system where the state can get to it, some economists have advocating banning cash. And some countries have already done so. Italy made cash transactions over 1,000 illegal. Switzerland is proposing banning cash payments in excess of 100,000. Russia banned cash transactions over 10,000. Spain banned cash transactions over 2,500. And Mexico made cash payments of more than 200,000 pesos illegal. Uruguay banned cash transactions over 5,000, and France made cash transactions over 1,000 illegal, down from the previous limit of 3,000. Denmark has also made moves towards a cashless society. They're not part of the euro, and they have their own currency called the krone. And the Danish government is proposing to scrap cash as a cost-saving measure. Even a member of German Council's economic experts is calling for a cashless society. He said it would be a good subject for the agenda of the G7 summit. And as for Canada, we're already well onto that road. An RBS report from 2011 found that the world average for paying by plastic amounted to 40% of transactions. But the rate in Canada was 68%, making us the world leader in people who are voluntarily going cashless. We also don't have a penny anymore, so the precedent has been set to get rid of nickels and quarters. And, I mean, how far is this cost-saving measure argument going to reach? I mean, perhaps we better just get rid of all coins and all paper money to stop the drug dealers and the terrorists. The Royal Canadian Mint has actually looked into digital currencies, and although they later abandoned the project when it became clear that the state is not going to be able to duplicate Bitcoin. In fact, the whole point of the Bitcoin scheme is that it is independent from state involvement. Canada's Interact system is the world leader in digital fiat transaction systems. You can pay by debit card at a cash register or pay user fees at a bank machine. In the U.S., these kinds of transaction systems would be owned by the banks, and they usually charge fees on customers or impose cost on retailers. But the not-for-profit Canadian Interact costs so little that it overtook cash as the Canadian standard. A PayPal survey found that 71% of Canadians are ready to go cashless. And an RBC Shoppers Drug Mart poll found that 76% of Canadian women typically carry less than $50 on them, compared to 66% of men. And as Wayne Bossert, former executive vice president of RBC, says, we are increasingly becoming a cashless society. Canadians are recognizing that debit is a convenient way to pay, and now they can earn reward points on debit purchases that translate into savings. Reward points on debit cards, as in like air miles and PC or shopper points, and all those other fake numbers that translate into cheaper groceries or movie theater tickets or whatever. You see, these fake reward points are not savings at all. They're just tokens in a phony economy where goods and services are provided by the corporate state apparatus. As the Canadian Bankers Association works on a unified, standardized system for smartphone payments in Canada, something that is likely going to evolve into a Interact for smartphones, analysts are all agreeing that within just a few years, our smartphones are going to be completely merged with our wallets. And I mean, greater advancements in technology are generally welcomed with open arms. Being able to pay for goods and services with your phone is a temptation that I don't think too many people are going to decline. You know, it's that classic problem reaction solution method that we've come to expect from the American elites. Their solution to the stock market crash in the early 2000s was to lower interest rates and thereby creating another problem. And the masses reacted to the bust in 2008 and 9, and the solution provided was more government intervention and even lower interest rates. And now the Fed is stuck at zero and quantitative easing just to keep everything afloat. But floating on what? I mean, the dollar's value is determined by a cartel of bankers and people's willingness to keep the casino going. The solution the elites provide in Canada and the US is devaluing the currency, keeping interest rates low, and in effect wiping out the pensions and the retirement savings of the elderly, to name at least one group that's being affected. Everyone sees the effect of a nationalized monetary system when we go to the grocery store. Now, what will bring about this North American Union, according to the elites, is the breakdown of this system. Only then will there be any justification for locking our cash inside the electronic banking system. Goods and services will increasingly become rationed, not according to some free market pricing system, but the central planning grid of the authorities. And when money has become completely electronic, that is just nothing but numbers on your phone, well, the international banking system will have complete control of money. And they will be able to just debit and credit individual accounts at will. The entire market order will be supplanted, and it will be de facto communism. But hopefully not on my watch. Hello everyone, this is Dan Dix reporting for Press for Truth TV. As technology continues to advance on an exponential curve, the global elite are continuing to find new and innovative ways to track and trace everything you do. We are already under the watchful eye of Big Brother through the monitoring of our online activity, but now the elite want to take it one step further by collecting your biometric information. In fact, one of the biggest and boldest steps in this direction is currently underway in India, where all 1.2 billion of its residents are currently being outfitted with a unique identification number.
India's unique identification program started just a year ago. If it succeeds, India will become the first country in the world using biometric data for identity purposes on a national scale. Its first phase is aimed at the poor.
Each number will be tied into 3 pieces of biometric data: fingerprints, iris scans, and a picture of the face. The biometric identity number will be entered every time someone accesses services from government departments, driver's license offices, and hospitals, as well as insurance, credit card, telecom, and banking companies. They are currently processing over 1 million people a day. Now, they say that it is not mandatory, but if you want to have a bank account, if you want to have a driver's license, if you want access to government services, hospitals, food programs, you're going to have the number, so essentially you do need to get it. Mahatma Gandhi must be rolling in his grave. As the founding father of an independent India, he was known for his resistance to tyranny through massive civil disobedience. But sadly, now India has become the testing ground for an eventual global cashless society. Canadians are also slowly going down this path. In fact, according to Citizenship and Immigration Canada, implementing biometrics will bring Canada in line with other countries. And the linking of our biometric information on a shared database with the American authorities is moving us another step closer to a North American Union. There are products available on the market, such as this RFID blocking passport cover, so that you can protect your information. You see, in this Big Brother Orwellian nightmare, people being treated like criminals will become second nature. And the ones who are pulling the strings know that it works best if you train them when they're young. This is well underway and currently being carried out by the Free Masonic Lodges of Canada through their initiative, Masonichip, which stands for Masonic Child Identification Program, where parents are being encouraged to give their child's biometric information to the Masons for safekeeping in order to track a missing child. Freely handing over our biometric information is currently being normalized through products like Siri's voice recognition app for the iPhone and the Xbox Kinect, which scans all of your features. Remember, our liberties are taken away from us incrementally. So let's fight this every step of the way and not be treated like criminals by handing over our fingerprints and eye scans. Gandhi showed us by his example that non-violent civil disobedience does work. So as this agenda continues to develop, let's just simply not play along. Global non-compliance is an idea that scares the elite. So let's make it happen.
When disgraced boss Mike Ashley turned up in an inspection of a Sports Direct factory this morning, they frisked him and found a huge wad of cash. Nothing illegal about that, of course, yet somehow we're conditioned to find raw, ready cash a sign of the underhand these days, or at least something a little bit seedy. And now there are esteemed voices ready to make the argument that we, as a society, go cashless, or at least use less cash. A leading US economist suggests that central banks should phase out paper currency. But would it work? Lewis Goddell tries to figure it out.
How many of us would pay for something with 50s? And even if we did, how many shopkeepers would accept them? This is at the heart of Harvard economist Ken Rogoff's thesis that high-denomination banknotes, £50 notes or $50 bills in the US are used for organised crime, tax evasion and even spur illegal immigration. If you see a briefcase of $100 bills, you know where it's from, as any fan of Breaking Bad would tell you.
There's a variety of denominations. How much is enough?
Rogoff believes that abolishing high-value cash notes would allow central banks to stimulate the economy by making negative interest rates work better. At the moment, if negative rates are in place, i.e. banks are charging you to deposit your money, you might as well hold it in cash. By abolishing high-value notes, you remove that option and make people and businesses spend. But from gold coins to the gold standard, money has existed in high-value form since the ancient world. How prepared would people be to give up that right? Ask the Weimar Republic or Harold Wilson, politicians have oft come unstuck messing with our money. In this uncertain financial world, it might take a brave one to ask us to part with it now.
That doesn't mean, of course, that the pound here in Britain, in your pocket or purse or in your bank, has been devalued.
Well, there's a brave one right here. Ken Rogoff joins us now from Boston, and Fran Boyd, the Executive Director of Positive Money, is with me now. Thank you very much for joining us. And Ken Rogoff, how do you actually see this working?
Well, just to be clear, I'm in favor of less cash, not cash less. I think going entirely without cash in the foreseeable future would be a mistake. Privacy, what if there's an electric outage, convenience for small transactions. But if you look around the world at the advanced countries, the Euro, the Japan, the United States, they're just swimming in these big bills that most people never see. There was a joke that the 500 euro note was the Bin Laden because everyone knew about it, but no one had seen one. 80% of our currency is in cash. It's $3,600 bills for every man, woman, and child, pretty similar in the Eurozone, twice as much almost in Japan. And the central banks do surveys. They say people love our currency, just they hold about a tenth of that.
Right.
And they don't know where it is.
Let me talk to Fran Boyd then. If we are swimming in all this cash we never actually use and most of us never actually see, what's the point?
Well, actually, I mean, in the UK, cash is only 3% of all the money we use, and the remaining is 97% is digital money we use with our debit cards. I think it's a really interesting idea to think about moving towards a less cash society, but I think there's a big part of the debate which isn't being discussed, which is what's that cash replaced with, and the electronic money we use through our debit cards isn't the electronic version of cash. They're actually different because of the institutions that creates them.
And isn't that the point, Ken Rogoff, that suddenly you've got the privatisation of money, that if I have wads of cash, I can keep them under the bed or do whatever I want with it, but as soon as it belongs in a digital structure like a bank or society, then they can do with that what they want?
Well, first let me say the UK is in a very different position than the United States or Europe. You don't have, we have the $100 bill, Europe has the 500 euro, Switzerland has 1,000 Swiss mark, like $1,000. Singapore has a 10,000 note, $7,000. The UK is in a different position. That said, if you look at actual sales in retail shops, they're not using so much these large notes. But if you look at, when they seize drug, big drug busts and other things, they find them a lot. So we have cash declining in the legal economy, and it's rising in the underground economy. So it's an idea of striking a balance.
And there is this seediness now that is associated with wads of cash. If you open a suitcase and it has cash in it, you don't think, what a wonderful surprise. You think, what on earth has gone on here, right? There is that connotation.
No.
I mean, I'm not denying that there are issues with tax evasion, and definitely thinking about abolishing the bigger notes could go towards that. But I think this really throws up bigger questions in terms of what is money for? How do we design a money system that actually works for people? And I think that if we're going to really worry about tax issues and the seediness of big suitcases full of money, the bigger tax justice issues around corporate tax avoidance.
And to be fair, Ken, you never actually addressed that question.
I don't think they're bigger quantitatively.
What about this question of privatisation? That money is a very public currency, I suppose, want of a better word. As soon as it becomes digital, you lose that.
So I'm not getting rid of smaller notes that most people use. And, it's perfectly possible, I discuss it in my book, for the government to provide its own electronic currency at a very subsidized rate. In fact, I propose, and I think in the UK this has been long considered, giving low-income people free debit cards. They do that in the Nordic countries.
What do you make about this idea of personalised digital cash?
I think that we definitely need to think about central banks issuing a digital form of cash, and actually central banks, there's more and more research coming out to say that they want to move in this direction. I think, at the same time, we need to look at the actual system and how it works and the structure that underpins it. And I think that it's not necessarily that simple in order to move to a economy that gets rid of cash and just replaces it with a digital currency.
Are you looking for a podcast that talks about life, the universe, and everything? Listen in to the Illumination Hour, Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Listen live at Spreaker.com or nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. We're also on SoundCloud, Spreaker, Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, and iTunes. The Illumination Hour, brought to you by Nonpartisan Liberty for All Media and Radio Network. And your host, Ellen Stallone. Because a spark can illuminate the world.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
And we are back, Nonpartisan Liberty for All. So there were a lot of points brought up in some of those clips with the DNA. I'll just say that basically they had brought up pretty much the story that I had talked about, that they're targeting kids that don't know any better, or even people in general that just don't know, making them think it's mandatory for them to give their DNA, and that it should be illegal. But again, the government can do whatever they want. I think with going to a cashless society, it's not if, it's just a matter of when. And there's so many negatives to that, a lot more negatives than positives. There are a few positives, but not really, because if you look at it now, you already have the option to be cashless anyway. So you don't have to use cash if you don't want to. So you can get direct deposit from your job most places, and then you use your debit card for everything, and then you never actually have to touch cash anyway, unless there's somewhere you go that only accepts cash. And there's not many places anymore. Now, one of the places that does only accept cash and is a huge cash business is where I live, Las Vegas, casinos. And casinos, there is a need for $100 bills and big bills, and a lot of them. So we'll get to that. But, you know, you're talking about thousands of dollars and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that are needed to gamble. And, you know, they may do something like a marker if it's, you know, some billionaire. But, you know, if you're gambling with even $10,000, $20,000, you need cash. And unfortunately, I've gambled with about 10,000 or 5,000 before. So, you know, try giving that to somebody in 20s. So one of the first things they talked about is getting rid of hundreds, because they obviously, with everything else, want to slowly bring people into this whole thing, which, again, it makes no sense from the standpoint of the consumer, because, again, right now you have the option. So you can either use cash or not. You know, you can pretty much go totally cashless as long as you don't gamble. So where is the benefit to the user, the consumer, to going cashless? Now, if you're someone trying to present this to the people, obviously they've already done this over years and years, at least the last couple decades, between drugs and terrorism, is they have demonized cash. So if you have cash on you, it's, why do you have so much cash on you? It's already that whole mind state, like, that they put in people's heads in certain states about guns. Like, what do you need a gun for? Why do you have a gun on you? Or, you know, if it's illegal in your state to open carry or something. They've put that in people's heads via media, government media, politicians, whatever. So now it's, if you got a bunch of hundreds, you must be a drug dealer, or you might be a terrorist. So the way that, and they've been building this up, the way that they have been already convincing people over years is via putting those ideas in people's heads, that it's already there. So you must either be involved in terrorism, drugs, or some other illegal form of making money, prostitution, or a bunch of things that basically should be legal anyway. But the reality is the majority of people that have cash is not because they're involved in a legal business. Some people still like to use cash. Some people, we already know that all our bank information, the same as our emails and other data, is collected by the government. And along with that, they can track your specific spending habits through cards. So like store cards, if you have a supermarket card, and then it even gets to specifics. I don't know that the debit cards or credit cards, they can link it to pull the specifics of what you buy. They may be able to do that now. They may have invented the technology where it stores that information, but I don't believe it does. I think it just picks it up on the card, but it may. The chipped cards may be more, even though the reason is, of course, for more security, and that may be a valid reason, but they may also collect more data. And I don't know that. I'm just speculating. They may or may not. I don't know. But I do know that all of your transactions that are made through a credit card or debit card, of course, have a record and are collected by the government with everything else. So there's that. So if you want to buy stuff and you just don't want the government to be collecting all your data, it doesn't mean you have something to hide and you want to use cash, then you want to use cash. But the only way, in my opinion, that they can present this to people, because they'd already exist. Like I said, you can be totally cashless already if you want to, is to continue with the demonization of, especially now with terrorism. But they've already been doing this, like I said, for years. If you have a bunch of hundreds in your pocket, it's why do you have a bunch of hundreds in your pocket? Even though on your bank card, you could have $10,000, right? But it doesn't matter if you have $10,000 worth of hundreds, you must be doing something illegal. And even the police now will take your money without even arresting you or accusing you of a crime if you have cash. It's like cash has become evil and demonized because cash is still a way of freedom because you cannot track it. And that's where the resistance, obviously, with people that support the ideas of freedom and liberty comes in, the resistance to going cashless. Because, again, I don't see a point for the consumer. Now, I see a point for the government because of all the tracking. So what would happen, first of all, is if it's issued by a bank or central bank, which it would have to be, they have total control over your card. So everything you buy, everything is now a record of the bank i.e. the government. You don't have any private transactions if you borrow money from somebody and want to pay them back in cash. One of the first things they mentioned, the first step is, getting rid of, say, like, and they've mentioned this already, hundreds and fifties, because then it makes it harder to have large amounts of cash, because now you take, $100 bill is 520s. So instead of carrying, a smaller amount, now you have this big, huge fucking stack of cash, and it makes it harder for people. So they want to make it harder for people initially. And then it's, from there, once cell phones get to the point where, which they're pretty much there from what I understand. I know a lot of people at small businesses, or like when I went to the gun show, they have tables set up and they're doing all their transactions off of cell phones, even swiping the card, even though you could type the card number in, but you can hook up a card swiper to your cell phone, and with a program run everything that way. But there's a tracking of all transactions. There's the bank and the government essentially control all ability to conduct all commerce, because they control all the money. If they want to take your money, they can take your money. If they say you owe taxes, if they say you owe whatever, you have no control. You cannot say, well, fuck you, I'm not paying this. They can take whatever they want. They can shut your card off. If you're accused of a crime, whether you did it or not, they can shut your card off. Now you have no money. Now you're fucked. And or they can leave it on and then, of course, track where you're at, because that's your only way of, using, well, I guess you could get somebody else. I'm sure at some point there'll be something, in the future to implant in that person or something like that. But I mean, you could have somebody else help you or pay for something or, whatever. But outside of that, you're fucked. The other thing is you'll have to use banks. Now, they had mentioned in one of the clips that they're doing negative interest, and they are. We had talked about this on a couple of the shows with Ken Shorjan of the Daily Economist about Japan and other countries actually doing negative interest, where you have to give them a percentage of your money to keep your money in the bank. Why you would keep your money in the bank and pay them a percentage of your money to do it, I have no fucking idea. But that's, you can just take it out. But if they want to go negative interest rates, they can. And as he said, that can push people to spend their money, because you're like, hey, the more money I have, the more I'm being losing it, negative interest rates. So they can totally control all of commerce, all of the economy by doing different things, because they control all the fucking money. It's not like they don't control it now, but there's enough out there that they can't, they don't have total control over what's out there. They have total control over new money that they inject into the economy or into whatever they're fucking using it for, the stock market, but they can't really do anything about what's already out there. They can target you and accuse you of being a drug dealer, and they can easily, asset forfeiture. We've talked about that, as well as structuring deposits. So I don't even know how that would work. I guess it would just be automatic, so you couldn't structure deposits. But if they accused you of doing something illegal, again, they can say this is drug money and seize your money. And there's nothing you can do about it. Like, you can sue and pay a lawyer a bunch of money and probably lose. But they have control over taking that money if you're accused of some kind of crime or something like that. They always know your balance, or you can check your balance, or if you get fined, they can just take it. You get a ticket. They can also do things with the biometrics. And I don't think that's something initially, but RFID maybe. They can put an RFID chip in it. The biometric stuff is something that they were going to do even with the real ID. They were going to, from what I understood, fingerprints and retinal scans, which from what I understand is not happening, but it was initially in the bill. So I would think at some point that will happen. Then, of course, there's all of these are part of this, or privacy and freedom. Having the freedom to be able to buy what you want without people knowing, without the government knowing, and having that privacy and having that freedom to be able to do whatever you want with your money. If you want to save a bunch of money and don't want the government to know about it, or if you want to buy things that you want to buy a prostitute legally, or if you, and this is, like I said, how they present it, you want to buy a prostitute illegally, well, what do you do then? They'd have to come up, obviously, with ways of paying people, but what's going to happen is they're going to have algorithms that check through all these transactions, and if they come up with suspect transactions, because, again, there's going to have to be a way for you to pay somebody else. And you'll probably have to enter something, as to what that is, or if it's taxable. It will be an opportunity for them to definitely collect more tax, because nobody will be able to hide any money. So they'll get to use more money to kill people, to build their armies, to fucking do all the bullshit that they do, and still end up $20 trillion in debt. But, spend all the money on war, spend all the money on all the shit they're giving to the police, the social welfare state, and then bank bail-ins, same thing. Where we've talked about bail-ins as opposed to bailouts. So bailout, through taxes. Bail-ins, oh, well, we need to do a bail-in, so we're going to take half of your money and we can just take it. Now they can just take it if it's in the bank, but if you suspect that there's going to be a bail-in that's going to happen, you could take your money out of the bank. You can't take anything out. It's total control. And they'll present it in a way that it's the bank, not the government, but it's the government. And it's the government controlling all of this shit and having no privacy, no freedom when it comes to purchases, money earned, business, anything. It will be totally controlled by the government. Now, supposedly, and they could just pass a law that if it comes down to, well, certain states won't adopt it. And that's where kind of Nevada comes into it, because Nevada, the whole state has casinos. And it would be something that they would not want to adopt. But just like they got Nevada to up the or lower the DUI blood alcohol level, because I think it used to be 1.0 and they got them to lower it to 0.08 or 0.1 to 0.08. And they did it because they said, we're not going to give you money for highways. The federal government, one of the ways that they're controlling the states is through funding. And that's why states need to be self-sufficient, even though that I don't know that it's possible, because I don't know how they tax the states. But the way things work now is you may be paying a certain amount of taxes, not you, but the state may be paying a certain amount of taxes and they don't get that back. It goes to another state that pays less and gets more. It's really fucked up the way shit is now, because states can't run themselves. They're not self-sustaining. And I don't know if that's because of the amount of tax that the federal government is taking from the state, or because of the ridiculous spending. I mean, they're getting all these programs from the federal government. The federal government pretty much runs everything. The states don't have that much say or control at all, because one of the big things being the funding, because they'll just cut it off. I mean, that's how they got Common Core implemented, which technically is illegal because it's federal. So this is an example of what government does. So federal school standards are unconstitutional. Not like it matters to them anyway. So to do it in a way that they can have deniability and say, no, we're not doing that, they're not federal standards, is they can say, well, we have these standards we came up with the Gates Foundation and other people and a bunch of bureaucrats. And if you agree to adopt these standards, we're going to give you more money for education, which is blackmail. So, of course, they say, okay, we'll adopt, the standards because they want money. And then the states that don't, you have all these people yelling and complaining and screaming, why didn't you take the money? Schools need more money. And the problem with schools is not money. It's fucking education. There's no correlation, in my opinion, to education and money. You really don't need much. You need a fucking building. Do you even really need that? Well, I guess people need somewhere to go if you're going to have the traditional school model. So let's assume you're having the traditional school model. You need a building and some fucking books. I mean, really. And to pay the teachers. And all they do, every time a school is failing, they say the schools need more money. Education needs more money. Education always needs more money for some reason. But nothing changes. The only thing that changes is that the school gets more money. So essentially with the cashless society, it's almost like you need permission from the government in a sense, because they can deny, they could even deny a purchase if they wanted to. So think about that. So being that they now have your medical records, they have all of this stuff on you, and they have the technology. I don't know how far, because it's usually further ahead than what they'll admit to. But they do have algorithms that can go through databases and things like that. So it could even get to a point where they have to approve your transactions, and they're taking money from people and giving it to people who don't have enough money. So the whole, they could use it as a way of socialism, to implement socialism and redistribution of wealth, and say, well, you have all this money sitting there, we're going to redistribute your money. And these purchases you want to make, we're not going to allow you to make them because, you're in bad health, you have a bad heart, you can't. I mean, there's an example of this actually in Freedom to Fascism, where they call a pizza place and they have all their information, and for them to get a regular pizza, it's like, $80, but for them to get like a special pizza that's like a healthy pizza, it's $20 or something. And it's all based on having that information. So essentially the government can approve or not approve purchases and transactions. Now, if they're they could be directly monitoring you for whatever reason, or they could even have an automated system where, depending on the person, all of these things that are programmed in, and it could stop certain transactions. And then, just like a credit card, it doesn't go through, and they call the credit card company and whatever, and maybe then it will go through and then maybe it won't. So you're giving the government access really to do whatever they want with your money and to control what you can and cannot buy. So they want to implement solar panels, and that's all you can have or whatever. Or they want to implement whatever. So they'll know where you live, the type of house you live in, all of this information. And that's where it's going to go. This is not a fucking, joke or a conspiracy or whatever. And you look at this shit in the future in movies, and, they call them credits, and, that will cost whatever credits. And a lot of times they have, they go from cards to implants. And that's another thing that they've been talking about. But I think in the U.S., it's going to have to be a slow implementation where they'll start with getting rid of hundreds, they'll get rid of 50s, maybe even get rid of 20s. From there, they'll probably go, cashless, and it will just be cards. And then from there, it will keep going. It's like a whole plan that has already been designed of what and it could end up changing, but it's a tentative. I would look at it as a tentative plan of what they plan to do from beginning to end, and implementing a cashless society, with the end being a chip implemented under your skin that's also a GPS and goes through a whole thing of what you can and cannot buy. And I think there'll be things initially when you get it that you cannot buy. And then it might go through, by that point, the technology will go through all of your data and deny certain purchases. Now, people are going to say, well, the government wouldn't do that. Why would they do that? Well, it's control. the whole point of a cashless society is not for any other reason than control. Because you look at it now, I mean, the stats were what, almost 50% of transactions now. And I would have thought it'd be more, but some people don't even have bank accounts, so you got to think about that. And not because they don't want them. I mean, a certain amount of people who are denied bank accounts because they either fucked up their credit or don't have any or whatever, and they won't give them bank accounts. So there's that. But there's, so if you already have half the people or half the transactions, so that doesn't mean every person always uses their card, but you have that now where you have the option of, okay, I can use cash or I can use a card. So it's control, and it's to go after drug dealers, which all drugs should be legal. Go after prostitution, all should be legal. I mean, all of these things should be legal. Now, the real one they're going to push is terrorism, because they're going to say, well, a lot of people are going to say, drugs or prostitution or I can't think of anything else illegal off the top of my head right now. Maybe illegal gambling in places where it's not legal, betting on sports games and stuff like that, bookies, all that stuff. A certain amount of people will say, well, that's not really a big deal. Human trafficking is, but it's the U.S. See, the funny thing is, and it's not funny, but is that the government itself causes all of these problems, and they do it on purpose. So like human trafficking, and I've mentioned this before. I don't know if I mentioned it on the show. I think I have. But if immigration policy wasn't what it was, and people could, as they should be able to, go wherever they want, because this whole thing of governments owning land is ridiculous. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but you can't, I mean, human trafficking, it would still exist, but it would drop so far because all of these women, because a lot of them are women, but there are men too, that want to come to the U.S., they wouldn't need help from somebody else. Now, you could say they may need money, but once they get here, they wouldn't be scared to leave. And that's the whole thing, because they wouldn't get deported. Or they could change the fucking laws that if you're being human trafficked, I don't know if that's the proper English, you're being human trafficked, but people that are, victims of human trafficking can seek asylum. As far as I know, there's no laws on that. So they can't get away neither. So they create a lot of these issues, like with drugs. And we've gone through this before. They create the crime. They create the robbery to buy the drugs. They create all of it. They create even the synthetic drugs, which we're going to be talking about a bill to basically ban chemicals that they don't even know what they are. They're just like something else, and it's open to interpretation. I'll get into that when I do that show next week. But and the bill has come up. It's a bill from 2015, but they were debating it in the past couple days. So it's fucked up how, on one side they're moving towards legalizing marijuana. Even in Nevada, there's going to be in a couple months it was on there before too, like 10 years ago. There's a ballot question whether to legalize marijuana for medicinal purposes, and it failed the last time, but it was pretty close. So to be honest, I might actually go in and vote on the questions, even though if they don't want it to succeed, it won't. And I really believe that, but I probably will go in. I've never voted. I probably will vote on the questions, maybe. Yeah. But there's a vote no because of it's so ridiculous. These fucking people, I want to punch them in the face, I swear. On Twitter, there's stop, say no on 2, stop whatever because of the kids. You know how many times they've used kids as a reason not to do something? And usually drugs. Are they retarded? What is the fucking difference? They think if something's legal, that it makes a difference. Whether it's legal or not, it exists. It doesn't make a difference. Plus, more kids want to do it if it's legal. You make cannabis legal, less kids will want to do it. They'll go after harder drugs, actually. And you could say that's a bad thing, but make all drugs legal. And it's happened in Colorado. From what I understand, the usage has gone down, at least for, I believe, teenagers. But all of these things that happen are created by the government. And they do it because they need to create boogeymen so they can control people. So people will sit there and say, we need government because of this and because of that. And if you look at all the government media stories, they present all these things that will make people say, oh, it's dangerous. We need government. It all leads back to needing government. I don't need government. I don't. And I give the one example where I have used government, and I'm not talking where I'm forced to at gunpoint, really, or under threat of gunpoint, because I just renewed my license because it was my birthday like a week and a half ago. So I had to renew my license, and I didn't get the real ID. I got it's a real ID, but not the real ID card. But I thought of not renewing my license. And it's funny because I don't get pulled over that often. I'm trying to think the last time I got pulled over, 2009. And that was because the way I was wearing my seatbelt, and he didn't even ask for my insurance or anything. This wasn't pulled over. I was stopped and parked, and I got fucked with by the police when I got arrested for bullshit. But as far as just driving and getting pulled over, it's been, it was that one time, but that was like he noticed my seatbelt. So I got a cop driving next to me looking into my car, but he just said, I used to wear my seatbelt not across. I used to wear it kind of like behind the front seat belt. You know how you have the part that goes across you, like across your body, because it would wrinkle my shirt or whatever. So a cop noticed, and he pulled me over, and he just, he said, why you wear your seatbelt like that? Of course, he had an attitude. But I'm like, well, it wrinkles my shirt. He's like, if you get in an accident, he actually, to be honest, was trying to be helpful, but he was still a dick about it. Like, he didn't ask for my license or registration or anything. So he didn't fuck with me, but he was just, his attitude was just fucked up. But he's like, why you wear your seatbelt like that? And I'm like, well, you know, I just don't like it, and it wrinkles my shirt, and you know, whatever. And he had said that, well, if you get in an accident, that will rip you apart. And he said it with an attitude, of course. And then I was like, okay. And then that was it. And that was probably the best interaction I've ever had with a cop. And he still gave me a fucking attitude. Now, he did give me some useful information. Now I wear it across there because I assume that he knew what he was talking about when he had said that. So, and obviously, you know, if he wanted to fuck with me, he could have asked me for my license and registration and all of that. But he really didn't have a reason to pull me over. Like, because I wear my seatbelt like that, there's no law that really, or justification. So on top of it, he had no right to pull me over, and that's probably why he didn't ask me for my license or registration, and just, you know, it was just like, wear your seatbelt like that. But getting back to my license, so obviously if I don't have a valid license and I get pulled over, they're going to tow my car. And if I say, you know, no, I'm not going to let you tow my car, I'm going to take off in my car because you have no right, I don't have to fucking pay to get another license. In Arizona, you get a license for like 60 years or something. And, you know, here and every place else, they keep charging you. It was $45. And you have no right to charge me for my right to travel, especially after the first time. You could say, you know, people can defend, okay, even though I don't necessarily agree with it, there could be a non-government way to, you know, make sure that people can drive. But anyway, the money goes straight to the government. And of course, you would think the money that goes to the DMV should fix the roads, but somehow they don't have any money for the roads, even though the gas tax goes to fix the roads too. I don't know where all this fucking money is going, but whatever. A lot of it probably to the people that run the Federal Reserve, and that's why they started the income. It's not a coincidence that the income tax and the Federal Reserve were right around the same time. They probably would have passed them the same day if they could have. But, you know, I contemplated it, but you look at something like a license, okay? And you are extorted when you renew your license. And because it's under threat of force. Because if I don't renew my license and I get pulled over, I either would get arrested or get my car. I think I would get arrested if they wanted to, or get my car towed, and I wouldn't be able to defend my car or myself from getting arrested unless, of course, I wanted to get killed. So when I talk about every law being based on force, something as simple as renewing your license is based on force. I don't renew my fucking license because I feel an obligation to renew my license. I don't feel any obligation. Okay, I know how to drive. I've been driving a long time. Why should I renew my fucking license? I already pay gas taxes, okay? That's enough as far as the roads go. Because if you want to justify it and say, well, you should be paid, if you drive on the roads, you should pay for them. Yeah, but I shouldn't be forced to pay for them at gunpoint. And when it comes to the gas taxes, you could say in theory, well, there's no way you cannot pay them, I guess. So I could not buy gas But that actually brings up an interesting point, because when it comes to gas tax, you don't have a choice. If you buy gas, that's what it's going to cost. I guess you could say, I'm taking this gas and I'm only paying this for it somehow, but I mean, the pumps there's no way to really get out of it. So I guess you don't pay gas taxes at gunpoint, because they figured out a way to just blackmail you. And they blackmail you in the sense of, okay, if you don't pay the gas tax, then you can't drive, because you don't have gas in your car. So, but anyway, getting back to this, it's so much more of a serious thing than people think. They think, oh, going to a cashless society, they might look at it as not a big deal. The countries now that are really pushing for it are Denmark, Sweden, and England. And it also is something that can lead to a world currency, which is not a good thing, because if you have no control over anything, you have to rely on all these other countries and what they do. It's like the euro. I mean, different countries can fuck up the euro by what they're doing, and their policies and things like that. But the cashless or the world currency will also, as part of world government and a whole, leading into that. So I was talking about earlier, so they have and this is my belief, obviously. But I believe that they have a whole plan of, okay, we want to introduce a cashless society, because again, the ramifications of a cashless society and the control that it will give government is huge. It's bigger than most people think, because when you're talking about the ability to buy things, you cannot live without that, because if you can't buy food, you can't live. I mean, there are certain things that you can avoid that the government does. This is not one of them. If they went to a cashless society, the only thing, you could trade with people. So if somebody went and bought stuff on their card, but I'm sure it would get to a point where they would be questioned, like they're buying a certain amount, but you don't need that. Why are you buying all of this stuff when you don't need that? So, or gold or silver. Now, gold or silver would definitely be an option, but again, that would probably only be from individual people and not from businesses. And then what are they going to do with it? They're going to sell it into their well, I guess it would be the same way, they sell it to, say, the gold place, and then they transfer from their account to the other person's account or card. So, that's, I guess, how they would do it. The other thing is stuff like Bitcoin. But if at some point, I would think that the federal government would have in their plan a law that forced businesses to accept only this currency, that you can't have a business unless, you know, and that would be at the point, especially when you went to a world currency, a cashless world currency. And then we'd be really fucked. Not like we're not fucked now. And tomorrow I'm going to get into all of the things that the government is doing to prepare for not a cashless society, but that's part of it. But all the things the government is doing or has done already to prepare for a total takeover. And I think going to a cashless society is a huge part of it. A huge part of it. Because it's something, you know, there's certain things, like I said, that you can avoid or you cannot comply, and you can do things so it doesn't affect you. Now, those things might be illegal because it might be not complying or just, you know, not doing certain things that you could be arrested for, like not getting a license or not registering your car or things like that. But with this, if you don't comply and it gets to the point where businesses are not going to accept anything except these fucking cards or however it's structured in this electronic form of currency, there's nothing you can do. You can't buy anything. So how do you do that? And then, of course, for people that, when it comes to drugs, which should be legal, and some people use to we've talked about self-medication, we've talked about people, you know, using certain drugs to kill pain that are illegal and things like that. And they're going after, we've talked about Kratom and how they're banning that as of the 30th or Schedule 1ing it. And I'll talk about next week the bill, the House bill that wants to go after all these synthetic drugs as well, which, again, if it wasn't for the government making all the other drugs illegal, nobody would be creating synthetic drugs. But it gives them more to go after. It gives them reason. And I really think what's going to get people on this, along with, there's an association that's been built up that cash is bad, cash is crime, cash is criminal. If you have a certain amount, $100 bills. If you got a couple 20s on you or whatever, or got a couple hundred worth of, a couple 120s or something like that. But if you got $1,000 in hundreds or a couple $1,000 in hundreds, right away it's association that's been programmed into people's minds. And I used to carry around like $3,000 in cash that I gambled with because you have to have cash. And what sucked, and this is the first thing I thought about when they talked about getting rid of hundreds, even though I don't really gamble anymore, but was anytime I was putting in, even if I was putting in $500 into a machine, I would ask for hundreds. Because if you put $500 in a machine, that's 25 fucking bills that you got to put in a machine, as opposed to 5. And that sucked, sitting there putting in fucking 20s. So that's the first thing I had thought of. So I think the real thing that they're going to do and you see these quote unquote terrorist attacks that they're going to use to go after guns, which in a way makes no sense because if things are so... See, they're all contradictions, but they could say on one side, well, we need to get rid of guns now because of terrorists. And how many of these are false flags or terrorists that they run or whatever, or that they helped to, like the FBI will help somebody to plan something out and give them the gun or whatever. This last one was in a mall in Washington, D.C., and he took the guns from his father. So most of the shootings, no gun laws that they talk about would have stopped them. And again, the amount of people that get killed by rifles, semi-automatic rifles compared to handguns isn't even close. It's a tiny fraction of an amount. It really is. And it seems like, oh, there's so many people getting killed by random gun violence. And it's going down every year, actually. Or at least staying the same. I don't know what it will end up as this year, but it won't be any more than it was probably than, the past few years. So they'll say, well, we need to get rid of guns because, these attacks. So we need, it's the same type thing. It's, okay, we have a plan how to ultimately ban guns. And they incrementally implement it. So it starts with, okay, we need to ban what they call assault rifles, semi-automatic rifles. And then from there, it's not going to change anything because handguns. And then we need to get rid of handguns. And then, of course, or we can only have guns that are like revolvers or something, and rifles that have to be I can't even think of the name of them right now. It's getting late. The bolt action, like the single bolt action rifles. So like anything that has a magazine will be banned, and then they'll go from that to nothing, and then they'll be, so it's on all fronts, which lead to the ultimate goal, and that is to control every aspect of your life. But see, with guns, they can ban, the sales of guns, but there's so many that are existing already, and if you already have them, plus the technology of being able to make them yourself is getting easier and easier, or more sophisticated, where it's easier and easier for people to do that. It's something you can get around. Now, you'd be breaking the law, but really at this point, laws have nothing to do with morals or what's good or bad. Or what a law is something that a bunch of politicians got together and decided is what's best for people. And you notice that every politician is an arrogant fuck. And the reason why is because they all have a plan of what they believe is best for everybody. They want to implement this plan and that plan and all of these plans. Nobody gets up there and says, you know what, I want to give, and if they do, they don't actually fall through on it anyway, but I don't think anyone's actually kind of said it like this. Reagan said some stuff, but he didn't follow through on it, obviously. Look at the fucking drug war. But that gets up there and says, you know what my plan is? My plan is your plan. My plan is for you guys, the people, to do what you want to do as long as you don't hurt anybody or mess with their property and figure shit out. I'm not your parent. I'm not your whatever. I don't know what's best for you. I don't know what's best for fucking 320 million or however many people. But no, they get up there and tell you, they don't say it this way, but in other words, I know what's best for 320 million people. Cashless society, yeah, that's what's best for you. No, it's not what's best for the people. It's what's best for the government to track people. And it has nothing to do with terrorism, and it has nothing to do with drugs or crime or any of that, because they don't want to stop crime. It puts them out of a fucking job. They want more money for their budgets. Not that it puts politicians out of jobs, but it gives them less to do, but it puts government workers out of jobs. No, they want to do it because they want to control you and know what you're doing. All these movies that show this future of government running everything, is not just imagination of these creative people. Government's been so involved in movies. Some of it is they want people to see that, not out of there's two things. They want people to see it not out of fear that it will happen, because most people don't look at it that way. And I remember when I was a kid, like younger, like 10 or 11, I didn't really think of it that way. But most people don't. Of course, now I look at it like that, and I look at it as a positive movie, anything that shows that kind of future, because it shows what can happen. But most people don't even look at it that way, so it doesn't make a difference. But it's almost like they want to prepare people for what things are going to be like. So they work closely with Hollywood. They're very involved in Hollywood, in movies, and of course in all forms of media. But this shit didn't come up by accident or because of imagination or any of it. How many movies have you seen that have a cashless society? I bet at least 10. I'm trying to think of the movies that they mentioned credits. I know that movie with pre-crime with Tom Cruise, Minority Report, it was Cashless Society. And yeah, they'll promote it initially as convenience, but really you already have it as an option. So that's the people that think about it. They're like, well, I already have the convenience. Why can't I have that and this? And have the option to use cash too. So that's not a valid reason. So the way I think, again, they're going to convince the people is crime, but, an association, which they've been doing. And I can see that from a mile away, just how they've demonized cash, and how most people just associate it that way. But terrorism, I think, is going to be the number one thing that we have to make sure that people aren't funding terrorism. And that's one of the reasons why they have the structuring of deposits. If you withdraw a certain amount of money, it has to be reported to the government. I mean, they're already in all this shit and tracking it already. So it's not like, they're not tracking any of it. But that's not good enough, because you still have the option of, I guarantee you that if I saved up a bunch of money and saved it in cash, and then went to use that money for something, the government would be all over it. I think somebody tried to buy a car in cash and they wouldn't sell it to them. Even though that money would come from working a legal job, they would assume, well, why do you have it in cash? Well, maybe I didn't want it in your bank. Maybe I don't trust you. Maybe I don't want you to know how much fucking money I have because it's none of your fucking business. But you don't have that freedom anymore, really. Because even if you keep cash, you're going to be questioned on it. Glenn Beck had said something disturbing, that he was told, I think it was by like a former FBI agent, or maybe he even is an FBI agent that's friends with him, that if he keeps cash, to keep the receipts. Now, you can go into your bank statement and, you know, show, okay, I withdrew this and I withdrew that, whatever. But, you know, I don't know how long they keep the bank statements for online. It's only a certain amount of time. It might be like up to 6 months. So he told them, you know, when you withdraw money, keep your receipt. Now, you can actually have your receipts emailed to you. Well, I know Bank of America, you can. So you should have all your receipts emailed to you if you take cash out. But why should you have to fucking do that? Why should you have to see this whole, there is no guilty until proven, or innocent until proven guilty. See, I already had it the other way. It's guilty until proven innocent. Like, you have to prove where you got your cash from. How fucked up is that? And people, because they've been so brainwashed, they think that way too. They're like, association that why would somebody have that much cash? They must be doing something illegal. Now, the thing about Las Vegas, though, at least, is there's the gambling aspect. So it makes it a lot easier in the sense that, you know, you could have gambling winnings of whatever and they pay you in fucking cash and you have to pay for it in cash. So I'm in a city that's cash based anyway. I know for a while at Gold Coast, they didn't even take debit or credit cards at the bar. Everything was cash based. And at the time, I was like, you know, that's kind of fucked up because I didn't ever carry cash and, you know, I didn't want to. They have the, I thought of it the other way. So they force you to take money out of the machine and then it charges you $5 on their side and then your bank charges you money. But now I kind of think of it the other way. I want all fucking businesses to be cash businesses because they don't have any records of your transactions. I mean, they have a record of a transaction, but they don't have a record of who. And now with all these, you know, store cards, every store has a card. And if you don't use their card, you don't get their discount. And it's like at the supermarket here, Smith's, they also have a gas station. So you earn points. So it benefits you to have their card, except for the fact that everything you buy, I'm sure, is stored on that card. So it'd be nice to have a card and just not have it in your name. And for a while I did. They just gave me the card and said, well, fill this out later. And then because of my prescriptions, which they automatically put on my card now, everything is in my name. So they could go through my card and look at everything I bought at Smith's if they wanted to. And that's where it gets into, we know what you eat. We know what you've been treated for. We know what your blood pressure is. We know this. We know that. We know fucking everything about you. So that's about all the time we have for tonight. But before I go, this whole thing of a cashless society, I know on the surface may sound, not that bad or a benefit or something like that. Now, again, there's no benefit because you can already go cashless if you want. The only benefit is to the government knowing everything about you, being able to shut your card off, being able to stop you from buying certain things. There's so many things they could do with this and so many ways it could go. And again, I feel like they have it all planned out already anyway. It's just a matter of, implementing it slowly. They can't just tomorrow all of a sudden go cashless, track everything and stop you from buying certain things, turn your card off when they feel like it and all that. It's going to take some time. But what we need to do is stop them from the fucking beginning, meaning, not even let hundreds go away. And even some businesses won't accept hundreds. And fuck those businesses. I know one reason why. They're worried about getting robbed, but, there's other reasons with some of the businesses, depending on what the business is. But this is something that is very important that it does not happen. And again, the best thing to do is, it's just like anything else, like with guns. You don't let them have any ground because, once they take one step, they're going to continue to take the steps. You stop them at the door and don't let them go up the steps. And I don't know that there's really much that people can do to stop this except to talk about it and talk about all of the negative things that they can do because of it. And not there's people that are all excited about getting a chip in them and having that whole sort of thing. And, I can just swipe my RFID or my chip and pay for shit. It's scary shit. So, really right now, I think is just to inform people that getting rid of $100 bills is starting to go in that direction. It's like the start of their plan, and you want to stop them before they even get to their plan. So we'll be back tomorrow, and I'll actually mention this again tomorrow because we'll be talking about all of the things government is doing or has done to prepare for a total takeover. And how many years away is that? I don't know. Things in the past, 2 presidencies, 16 years, it seems like a lot has happened regarding taking away freedoms. But it's been going on since the country started. But as technology continues, they're able to do more and more. And I think there's been so many advances in technology, of course, with terrorism and 9/11, they were able to exploit that. So we'll be back tomorrow. Be sure to tune in to that. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and have a good night. Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Check out the articles at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. I got a new one that I think most people will enjoy. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way it is.
operation, Heather. That's bored. Green light the asset.
Sir, I need more time.
We have no time. Are you going to give that order or not?
Sir, please.
You're too naive to see the truth. There's no bringing in born.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is September 27th, 2016, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning into Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Into the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and iTunes. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote self-ownership and the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent, by threat of force and violence. And we, of course, are happy to hear from you. And you can reach us via phone at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or via Skype at Nonpartisan Liberty for All. It's all one word. Just send a user request and your name and what you want to talk about. And if you'd like to call in, it's better to send a text first with your name and what you want to talk about as well. And you can get that information if you forget the phone number or the Skype username at Nonpartisan Liberty for All, which also links to all our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and has a number of original articles. I actually just posted 2 over the weekend, articles / blogs and things like that for you to read. And actually, they're kind of piling up, I've noticed. Since I've had the site, which has been a year and a half, I'm starting to write more and more articles. One of them, I believe, was very important. I don't know that it was the best or the best well-written, I don't know if that's proper English, or the most well-written article, but it had a lot of important points in it. And I thought that its importance of points that are the point that I wanted to get across gets across. I mean, I wrote it late at night. It still took me a couple hours going through it and everything, but I wrote it late at night when I was tired, so it's probably not as good as it could be. And it's like people believe that. And it just, I don't know. I don't want to get into a whole thing on this because we'll talk more about at least the UN. And I've been talking about this a lot anyway, but we'll get into it when we get into the UN probably next week, along with what they're trying to do, which, of course, they present it in a way, oh, it sounds great, but it's not. It's the same type of thing. It's a take total control, have all these international laws, because if you have international laws, if you have laws over 8 billion people, you have no, I mean, if you think you have power now, which you don't, how are you going to have power when there's 8 million people? There's going to be a bunch of bureaucrats at the top that control everything. And that's how it is now in the U.S. anyway. But it's going to be even worse. So we'll get to that in the next couple of days and next week. I don't want to spend all my time on that when there's important stuff to talk about tonight that is going on as well. A bunch of articles about a cashless society and more push to move to a cashless society, and the ramifications of that are very bad. You could say there's positives to it. Of course, there's always positives, and that's how they try to hook people from the positives. Unfortunately, there's a percentage of people that when things are introduced, new technology usually, or new things, they think that it's not going to be corrupted or it's not going to be exploited. And they say, oh, we're not going to do that. The things that people worry about, they come out and say, oh, we're not going to do that. Like guns. Oh, no, we're not going to confiscate guns. And they do. And you can look throughout history of all the things that government has said, no, but we'll never do that. A social security card, it will never be used as identification. There's so many things that they've done throughout history that they have said that, oh, we're never going to use this for this. And, of course, they end up doing it. They take pictures of you. They have the license plate readers now. I mean, they didn't come out and say, well, we're never going to have license plate readers, but license plates were meant for a certain purpose. Licenses were meant for a certain purpose. Now it's you need a license by 2020. You need the Real ID, which puts all your information in a national database. The databases are getting overwhelming, but what's going to happen is all these databases are going to link based on your social security number, and they're going to have a huge profile on everybody, and they're going to have technology that it goes through these profiles and finds the data that they need. And another database that they're going to have pretty soon is the two things that I'm going to talk about tonight. One they already have is the DNA database, and we'll talk a little about that and how they're expanding that. And then we'll talk about moving to a cashless society and the ramifications of that and how they're just terrible in what can be done moving to a cashless society and how many freedoms that actually takes away. But people think that, well, if we move to a cashless society, unarmed white people are killed too, unarmed Hispanic people. It's just getting crazy because the whole thing, and I could care less about somebody's race as far as I don't feel any closer to a white person than I do to a Hispanic person or a black person, unless, they're a friend of mine, and probably the person I feel closest to is my fiance who's Mexican. So, I don't have a agenda or I'm not somebody who feels closeness or some kind of obligation to people that happen to just have the fucking similar skin color or some shit. It's just ridiculous to me. And so nothing I say is based on that. And I've talked about how I witnessed racism, a lot of my life, from both sides. I've seen white people be very racist, and I've seen black people, or whatever you want to call it, discrimination or whatever. And I know some people say, well, black people can't be racist because it's an institutionalized thing. And I don't buy that, but I've seen all of it. So I really don't either way feel any type of closeness with somebody because of their race. It's, it doesn't really make a difference to me. And I've probably had a lot more black friends, at least over, as I got older, than white people was when I was younger, because that's all there in like elementary school. That's like all there was. But anyway, it's the brainwashing and exploitation of what's going on to push an agenda. And I talked about this when I talked about Black Lives Matter. And if you look on the websites they're promoting, they're all communist websites. So it's not even about the police anymore. So when I look at these things, and now the UN getting involved and putting all these things together, you see that it's not about black people. It's about an agenda to take more control and make people, everybody, slaves of the government, which you pretty much already are, because if you're paying a certain, actually any of your money to the government and they're taking it without your permission, that's, you're working for the government. You're paying property tax. They own your property. So we're all slaves to a certain extent, except the, 1%, the very elite, probably less than that, the 10% that actually contribute to running the country. So what's frustrating is that people don't see it. They'll look at it and just say, well, you don't understand it, you're a racist or something along those lines, or you don't understand it because you haven't been through it. And in a way, I can't say that I've had the same experience, because obviously I've had experiences where I experienced racism from white people, and I've talked about it because all my friends were black, and you want to be black and all of that shit. So I experienced that, but I can't say I fully experienced it, is my point. But I can totally relate and understand. And I have things even now that happen. So I can totally experience and relate, but at the same time, I see what is going on, and I see how they're really aiming it at a lot of millennials, because they've been through a whole thing of brainwashing. And I'm at the very at the very end of Generation X. I just missed the beginning of the millennial generation, but the younger millennials are the ones that are, or the ones that are in their early 20s, are especially being, brainwashed, because you can't tell me that it's worse now for people of color than it was when I was in high school. It's not. Now, that doesn't mean that racism has been eliminated, because it hasn't, and the biggest place it comes from, or the biggest perpetrator of racism, is the injustice system, is what I call it, the court system and the police. And that's the biggest. And, they're the ones with the power. But then they're turning to government, and they might not even realize, groups like Black Lives Matter, some of the people might not even realize, you can't sit there and ask for, protest the police and then ask for more government. It just doesn't. More government is going to bring more force and more violence and more police. And people think that because it's not a criminal law, it doesn't mean it's not enforced by the quote-unquote authorities or law enforcement. Taxes is not a criminal law. It becomes criminal, or any law. Health, not fucking getting health care. All of these things, the more laws, the more power you're giving to the government. So it's a big contradiction. And people aren't looking at it for what it really is. They're being fucking, I don't want to say bamboozled because of that movie, but they are for a political agenda. They're being used and screwed over. And it's frustrating to me, especially, you know, how the government has treated black people over the years. And that's what they're doing. And they're telling them that you can't do things for yourself. You need us, you whatever. And people don't even realize that there's the percentage of black people, there's obviously millions, and that are, you know, the stereotypical that you government media presents is not the majority of black people, but I still thought that it was adequate enough to post and that it gets the point across. So check that out if you have time at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. So but right before the show, I saw just an article that I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to cover this next week. Now, there's so many things that I feel I need to talk about, and I have show ideas. I even have shows already, the event set up for the next 3 shows, and now I'll have the next 4 after this. And there's just so many things that are going on that I feel like sometimes, and it's not being smarter than people or anything like that. There are plenty of people that can do all of these things, like engineers and hackers and non-hackers, computer programmers, that I can't do. Although I can write a little SQL, but that's nothing compared to what, you know, these sophisticated programmers do. And it's not about that. It's just about seeing things that other people don't see because they're just in a certain paradigm, or they don't have the time to see it, or they're not looking for it, or they just don't give a fuck, or for whatever reason. So I see these things going on, and it's like almost seeing them in slow motion, and the exploitation of what's going on and the setup of what's going on and how and we'll talk about this the next 2 shows, all of the things they're doing to prepare for a takeover. And there's another one that I just came across today, and I'll maybe mention it a little in the next 2 days, and then next week I'm going to do a show on the UN, because there's some things that they're doing, and they're just I don't know how I'd even describe them, but it's just a bunch of bullshit. They're a way to begin world government, and that's what they really want to do, as well as take the resources of the U.S. and, you know, even in their own plans, that's what's in there. It's you know, the rich country. I've talked about this, but now they did a commercial for it as well. But their plan about sustainable development, and they did a commercial with all these celebrities, which pisses me off even more. Now they're also talking about they believe there should be reparations to black people for slavery, and also for other stuff that's going on now. And some of the other stuff that's going on now, although is happening, but it's being exploited for one, and they're not telling the whole story. Nobody's telling you in government media that 4 to 5 people a day are killed by police. Nobody's telling you that all races are killed by police. That